Okay, let's do this. Yesterday on Instagram, I asked you guys, if you're not following me on Instagram, again, _Tom Noske just there. If you're not following me, head over and follow me there. Yesterday, I asked you guys in a story that I'll chuck up here to ask me questions, beginner questions for photographers, filmmakers, and digital artists. Anything really relating to what I post on my Instagram. So, and you guys came back with some pretty awesome questions. I was expecting it to be what camera to buy, what software to use, what to do this, what to do that. But you guys came up with some pretty interesting questions that I reckon I could probably turn into a few episodes. But we're going to go through as many as I can today in about, we'll call it quits at about 15 minutes. We'll see how we go. But before we get started, if I am a new face and this is the first time you're seeing me, my name is Tom. I'm a photographer and filmmaker from Melbourne, Australia, and I specialize in adventure and ocean photography. And then I work as a filmmaker full time. So I work for real estate individuals, small businesses, and but apart from that, literally anything anyone will pay me for. So it's the life of a freelancer, really. Anything anyone will pay me for. But yeah, today we're going through a bunch of questions that you guys submitted on my Instagram. So we're gonna jump straight into it. The first question is from Greg Johnson II. What inspired you to get into doing compositions and not just plain old photography? First of all, I wouldn't call it plain old photography. I still love photography, but what inspired me to get into compositions is probably because I haven't always done photography. Photography is something that I picked up in the last 18 months to 2 years-ish. I think I picked it up in, about August in 2017. I picked it up for the first time. I think I got into compositions just because Photoshop is a lot like painting. It allows me to construct environments that aren't necessarily fake. Like I create, if it's a sky replacement or if it's adding something to an image or removing something from an image, I find it's a lot closer to painting and drawing. And I started my artistic journey from a very young age painting and drawing. I actually did a lot of portrait paintings and portrait drawings when I was younger. I might chuck a few here if I can find any. When I was younger, and I just think that Photoshop is a lot closer of a representation of being artistic in that sort of way, creating something from nothing, I sort of feel. I love Lightroom and I love basic photography, but I find that whenever I finish a Lightroom edit, I feel as though it's not quite finished, or it's not quite complete, or it's not quite fulfilling, whereas I finish a Photoshop edit that's really taken, a couple of hours or maybe even a few days, I find it's much more fulfilling as far as me personally in my artistic style. The next question is, do you think equipment matters for photography? And that's from Mr_Dark_Minded. It depends. It's like, I'm a fan of the idea that the best camera is the one that you have, or the idea that you should only worry about using the equipment that you already have or can afford. But at the same time, it's like, if you want to be getting into certain aspects of photography, you're gonna need certain equipment. I wouldn't let it hold you back, and I wouldn't worry about it too much, especially because the equipment is expensive. Buying lenses is expensive, buying cameras is expensive. But you also want to, if you want to do this professionally, for example, you need to have the equipment. If it's a hobby, don't worry. I know plenty of photographers that just use their phone and they take incredible images. But yeah, if you're wanting to do this professionally, or if you're wanting to do filmmaking professionally, you're going to get asked. So for example, the first time I bought lighting equipment was for a photography gig. I hadn't used lighting up until that point, and I got asked by a startup who was making fitness equipment, and he asked me, do you have lighting? And I had to say yes on the spot. It wasn't something that I would recommend. Don't fake it till you make it. But if it's in the situation of getting a job, then sometimes having the equipment is good. But again, like I said, I'm a huge proponent of use the equipment that you have, or use the equipment that you can afford. Do not break the bank to get equipment for a hobby. Use the equipment that you already have. The next question is Photoshop or Lightroom? I find using Lightroom a little frustrating, and that's from Monsieur.H. I use both. I honestly can't really pick between. I wouldn't use just Photoshop and I wouldn't use just Lightroom, but that's just my personal preference. I started my photography editing Who is using a drill? Come on, it's 12:30. I'm just going to go ahead and hope that you guys don't hear that. Photoshop or Lightroom? Yeah, again, I use both. I started my journey with photography editing on Lightroom. So yeah, I use Lightroom for my basic adjustments, and then I put it into Photoshop for big adjustments, and then I bring it back into Lightroom for the final touch-ups. And if you want to check out my workflow, or you want to check out how I edit photos, I'll chuck a few examples of my videos up here. So I do a series called Unpacking That Gram, where I go through all kinds of edits from my Instagram. But yeah, I honestly can't pick between. What is a good camera for photography that doesn't break the bank? Oh, that's a great question. I'm a Canon fanboy, so my first camera was the Canon 80D. I did have a hand-me-down camera that was a Nikon, but I absolutely hated that thing. My first camera that I bought myself was an 80D, and I picked that up for about $1,100 with a lens. So that's not something that necessarily breaks the bank. If you wanted to go cheaper, pick up a point and shoot, but I would highly recommend, if you can afford it, get something that has detachable lenses, because that way you can upgrade the lenses without having to upgrade the body. So for example, if you bought a Canon TSI for example, or a A6300 from Sony, I know that they're quite good. I have a few friends that use those. They're also a camera that doesn't break the bank. I believe a friend of mine picked up an A6300 for $800 with a lens, which is, again, photography equipment is expensive, but that comparatively to some of the cameras that you can buy that are $4,000, $5,000, $10,000, that definitely doesn't break the bank. So I would say either a Sony A6300 or a Canon 80D, or buy one secondhand. What other photographers inspire you? From Jet Wayfarer. Other photographers that inspire me. I have to include my friend Peter Yantastic. Congratulations to him. He's just passed 100,000 followers on Instagram, which is pretty awesome. He was probably the first guy that I found on Instagram that I really fell in love with his style. It's a very sort of creative style, and sort of really brings out certain colors in his images. But my by far biggest inspiration on Instagram as far as photographers has to be Carl Shakur. Now, not only because this dude's just an awesome guy and I cannot wait for him to post more YouTube videos, but his work is just incredible. He's the main reason that I doubled down on that dreamy style, because it's so pleasing to look at. It's really nice, and it's sort of like, he really encapsulates the feeling that I get when I go to destinations rather than the actual visible thing. Other inspirations, I reckon, is my friend Jordan Hammond. There's a few other guys from Australia like Blonde Shooter, Ben Mack. There's a few guys that I'm friends with, Ben Savage for example. There's a whole bunch of guys in the community, but the big inspiration for me, and you can probably tell if you compared our photos, is Carl Shakur. I really try to sort of not copy his style, but be inspired by his style, definitely. The next question is, this is a great one. You got your first camera today and had to start from scratch. How would you go about it? Ooh, all right. Let's say, I would probably go about it the exact same way. No, that's wrong. I would not go about it the exact same way. The exact same way I did it was dumb. If I started right now, I would probably have doubled down on filmmaking from the beginning. I didn't expect to be a filmmaker. I wanted to just do photography and continue working my job, but it wasn't until I left my job that the reality of making money really hit me. So I would probably double down on filmmaking, which probably would have meant that I would have changed what I got in the beginning. I probably would have gotten a camera that was more suited for filmmaking in the beginning. I now currently shoot on a Canon 1DX, but I probably would have picked up something like it wasn't out at the time, but an A7 III or something like that, and tried to do filmmaking straight away. So I would have gotten straight onto emails telling people that I was a filmmaker when I really hadn't done anything, and I would have been practicing filmmaking a lot more. If you haven't watched my video on getting your first client, that probably covers a lot of what I could say here. I would just jump on the emails and be sending out emails to friends, family, people I know, people I used to work with, whoever needed filmmaking. I would be on emails like crazy. So yeah, if I was starting today and I got my first camera, I would get something more suited for filmmaking, and I would have been on everyone about working for them. So that would have been me if I was starting today. Love your work from Morty_boy_. Love your work, man. I want to start doing videos, but I'm not really sure where to start. There's so much to do. Yeah, you're right. There's heaps. So it's like, the only thing I can recommend is just start. I will actually be making a video on this topic, just starting, but yeah, that's the only thing I can recommend is just start and do it all the time. Shoot all the time, get used to shooting footage as well as photos when you go out to take photos, and then just edit all the time. Even if you don't post it, just edit and use the same footage over and over again. Just edit all the time. It's the same way you learn how to do photography. Just think back to when you first started photography and then use that for filmmaking. It's honestly just about doing it all the time. It's an intimidating task. Like, starting something fresh is intimidating because if you look back realistically, it's not something you have to do all that often. Besides maybe getting a new job, but even getting a new job, you're still talented, or you've still already acquired those skills over a period of time. Starting a new skill from scratch is an extremely intimidating thing to do because, you know, you start comparing yourself to all these people that have done it for years, rather than worrying about how they started out in the beginning. So all I can recommend for that is just start. Start doing it today. Start right now. Stop watching this video. Go shoot something. Wait maybe a few minutes. Finish the video for me. Leave a like and leave a comment. But after that, head out, shoot some footage, come back, edit it, head back out, shoot some more footage, and shoot in all conditions. Get your friends, shoot some people, go and shoot some landscapes, go and shoot the night, go and shoot in the morning. Whatever you can do, shoot indoors, whatever you can do to shoot as much as you can and edit as much as you can, that is what I would recommend. The next question is, do you ever shoot pics of yourself? A, and you have no drone. B, are you by yourself? I think what you're saying, and that's from My Kind of Awesome. I'm assuming you're trying to say that you don't have a drone and you want to shoot photos of yourself. Yes, I do shoot photos of myself. I do it less so now with my camera. I usually shoot most of the photos on my Instagram of me. So I usually get myself as a subject in my drone photos. But if I need to use my camera, I'll use a tripod. I used to have an 80D that had Wi-Fi connectivity, so I used to be able to connect my phone and use that as a remote control. But now the 1DX does not have that functionality, so I just had to set the 10-second timer, run out in front of the camera and hope I'm in focus. So that's how I shoot those photos if I can't. But yeah, it's annoying. Like it's a task. Like, it's definitely harder, and you're not going to be able to compose your image exactly how you want to because you have to leave it on a tripod. But my recommendation is just, you know, set it up on a tripod, get the exposure and composition that you want, and then just step into the frame. If your camera has Wi-Fi connectivity, that's the best option because then you can just trigger it from your phone. But the other thing as well is you can buy a remote trigger, so something that's wireless. So there should be a sensor on the front of your camera that you should be able to plug in a cord and put it into, and that'll connect to a remote, and you can just pull the trigger from there. So that should be something that you'd be able to get, and I'm pretty sure you can pick up a no-name one on eBay for like $100, so it can't be too bad. The next question is, what is the easiest way to Photoshop skies? I wish I had a video to reach you out to, but Peter McKinnon has a great video on this that I used to start out with, and I'll chuck that down the bottom there. The next question is from last.shift, and he says, personally struggling with trying to figure out my rates at the moment. Maybe some tips on that, question mark. This is a really good question, and it's a really difficult thing when you're first starting out, especially if you've never run your own business before. Trying to figure out how much you're worth and then asking for money is something that's super intimidating. It's something that's never going to get any easier, and it's something that you can only sort of begin to get comfortable with as you've got experience with it. But in the beginning, three things that I used in the beginning of my journey as a freelancer, even when I was working as a personal trainer, trying to figure out my rates then. There's three things that I used to think about, and there's three things I still think about every single time I work or every single time I send out a quote for someone. And those things are, how much do I want to earn per hour? And that's not just shooting, that's not just editing, that's overall. So if the job is going to take me 5 hours of editing and 10 hours of shooting, so say 15 hours altogether, how much do I want to earn over those 15 15 hours. Now, obviously you can't send a flat rate saying, I want to earn 60 bucks an hour to your client, but you can send it and split it up into your shooting cost and your editing cost. So for example, for me, I have a different rate for shooting and I have a different rate for editing, because sometimes I'll get clients that come to me and they want me to edit from something they've already got, so footage they've already got from previous clients or previous cinematographers, or they'll just hire me to shoot. So I might get hired as a sign and all I have to do is come and shoot, and they've got their own editor that does it. So that's why I split my rates into shooting and editing. So the first thing is think about how much you want to earn per hour. The second thing is, what is this job asking of me? So if it's a job that's asking you to travel a long way, so for example, I've got a wedding at the end of this month and it's in Sydney. So say for example, I would have to charge for that travel cost. Or, you know, for example, if it's a strenuous job, say if it's a real estate and it's quite a big house and it's a long day, or if it's a job where, you know, say for example, a wedding, like, you know, a wedding day, I've got to carry all my gear on my back, I've got to be carrying around the camera all day, and it goes all day and all night. So it's a very long job. So you got to think about what that job is asking from you. And the third thing is, what gear am I going to be using on this job? Say for example, you want to always think about your gear as an asset, and that asset can be rented out to clients. So for example, it's not just about how much you're earning per hour and how much they're paying for you, it's about how much they're paying for your gear. So think about, say for example, if you have $10,000 worth of gear, you need to come up with a sum of a rental cost for that gear for that client. I always try to think like, what equipment am I using? How much does that equipment cost? And how much would it cost to insure that equipment for the duration of the job? And then I come up with a fee somewhere around that. And that acts as sort of like an insurance cost for you and a rental cost for the client. So you need to think about them. Imagine that all they wanted to do, rather than hiring you, they were just renting your gear. How much would you charge them to rent your gear for a job for someone else to use? Obviously, you don't need to charge as much because you're the one using the gear, but come up with a cost for that. And then you've got extras. Say, for example, you need to license music, you need to come up with a cost for that. If it's a big job where you need to rent gear, you need to come up with a cost for that. Or say, for example, if you need to buy gear, you need to come up with a cost for that. And then from there, you should be able to figure it out. But the three main things are, how much do I want to earn per hour? What is this job asking of me? And what gear am I going to be using on this job? And you should be able to come up with a pretty good fee from that. The next question is, what software do you use to edit video? I use Premiere Pro and After Effects. I don't use After Effects for VFX sort of stuff. All I use it for is like stabilization and some color correcting. But apart from that, I use Premiere Pro most of the time. I want to get into using more After Effects, but God, that thing is an intimidating hill to climb. How do I make money through photography, digital art, etc.? I make money as a freelance filmmaker. So I work full-time as a freelance filmmaker. So I do things, I might chuck a few examples of jobs that I've done in the past. I've worked for high schools on their sports teams. I've worked for individuals for their fitness businesses, and I've worked for small businesses and real estate companies. So it's, you know, I'm still in the beginning stages. I've only been working as a freelance filmmaker for 18 months. So I'm still in the stage of saying yes to everything. I literally say yes to anyone who's willing to pay me. Obviously within reason. There are some jobs that I've said no to just because of the type of job it is, or for example, I got asked to literally record a lecture and I was like, I don't want to take my, you know, my 1DX and my expensive lenses and lighting and microphones and fill up hard drive space to record something that I don't even get to artistically manipulate. So I said no to that particular job. But anything in between where, you know, I'm being a creator, then I say yes to. Obviously the end goal is to get into working for tourism boards and working for, you know, resorts and traveling the world and working with big companies like Samsung and Mercedes and whatever. If anyone is listening who has a contact at Samsung or Mercedes or any of those big businesses, please send them my way. But yeah, if that's the end goal, but for now I'm a full-time freelance filmmaker. Why 24 frames per second is more cinematic than 60 frames per second? I actually have an interesting opinion on this one. I prefer 30 and 60 frames per second. I prefer that sort of like super smooth, almost fake look that 60 frames a second gives you, especially if you've watched my Brothers in the Boat rowing film. I shot and edited and exported all that at 60 frames a second just because I liked the motion. I liked having no motion blur. I really don't like the sort of like unsmooth look of 24 frames a second, but that is why people like 24 frames a second, because it's natural. It looks real, there's real motion blur, and it looks natural to the eye. But I personally prefer the look of 60 frames a second, but that's just my personal opinion. Industry standard is 23.976 or whatever it is, 24 frames a second. But I prefer, if I can avoid shooting at that or exporting at that, I usually export at 30 or 60. So that's just my personal opinion. Do not tear me to pieces in the comments, I apologize. If I'm working for you on a job, I will use 24 frames a second. But if it's a personal job, I will usually use 30 or 60. My apologies again. How to get started shooting for businesses. I made a video on this actually. It's up on my YouTube channel. It's called How to Get Your First Client with Photography or Filmmaking. So go ahead and watch that. But if you don't want to watch that, reach out to people, network, tell people that you're a filmmaker. The number one tip I think in the beginning to get started is make sure that everyone you know knows that you are a photographer or filmmaker. So even if it's your work colleagues, your friends, your whatever, the first jobs I ever got were for I was working as a personal trainer at the time. The first jobs I ever got were for other personal trainers. So I would let all the personal trainers in the gym know that I'm a photographer. And obviously personal trainers have websites and social medias. They need photography and they need video. So those were my first jobs that I did. Some of them I did for free, and then eventually I got paid, and it got to the point where I was earning, a few $100s a month extra working for those guys around the gym. And then when I left my job, obviously those guys chat, and then word of mouth gets out, and slowly but surely you begin to be known as the photographer or filmmaker in the area. So that's my best tip. Make sure everyone knows. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. You guys asked some amazing questions. I think this video is already well over 20 minutes long, so I think I'll leave it at that. But yeah, if you've enjoyed this video, if you've enjoyed any of my videos so far, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, head over to my Instagram _Tom Noske and check me out over there. And I will see you guys next time.